shadow.
Before we dim the lights together, consider subscribing to this quiet space we share, because what follows will change how you perceive the very foundations of reality. Tonight, we stand at the threshold of a question that has haunted the deepest corners of cosmic horror for nearly a century. Which entity represents the more profound terror? Cthulhu, the dreaming priest of R'lyeh, or Azathoth, the blind idiot god writhing at the center of all existence? This is not merely an academic exercise or a simple comparison of monsters. This is an excavation of fear itself, a dissection of the mechanisms by which the universe can utterly annihilate human consciousness, not with fang or claw, but with pure, unadulterated knowledge. The stage before us is vast, its dimensions stretching beyond the comfortable boundaries of human comprehension. The curtain rises not on a theater, but on the cosmos itself, where you are simultaneously audience and actor, observer and observed. In this shadowed amphitheater, Cthulhu emerges as the tide, the overwhelming presence that crashes against the shores of human sanity, promising a return to ancient alien order. Azathoth manifests as the center, the unseeing heart, whose mindless dance creates and destroys reality itself. The cosmic drummer, whose rhythm determines whether existence continues or simply stops. You came seeking a contest of terrors, a weighing of two names that behave like doors opening onto different chambers of the same infinite abyss. But the question is a mask, and the answer is the face beneath, a face that reflects your own cosmic insignificance, staring back from the void. The very act of comparing these entities draws you into their sphere of influence, making you complicit in the cosmic horror you seek to understand. The idea acts on you now, the key and the gate turning of their own accord, and you feel the lock inside your thoughts quietly concede. Cthulhu represents tangible dread, stone and slime, tentacle and dream, the grinding of impossible geometry against the hull of human reason. His terror spreads through image and nightmare, through the artist's fevered vision and the sailor's final log entry. If you are sensitive to his call, your hands will betray you, sketching angles that shouldn't exist, carving idols of green stone that seem to watch you work. The dreaming priest lies beneath crushing Pacific depths, but his influence seeps upward through layers of water and time, touching minds that believe themselves safely distant from his sunken realm. This is horror as evolutionary pressure, cosmic intelligence working through biological processes to reshape terrestrial life according to specifications written in the fundamental structure of space-time itself. When the stars align in configurations that human astronomy cannot predict, when the tides pull with rhythms that predate the moon's formation, then the barriers between dimensions grow thin. The terror of Cthulhu operates through recognition, the gradual understanding that humanity's dominion over Earth is a temporary aberration, a brief interlude between vast epochs of alien rule. His presence suggests that consciousness can be expanded, corrupted, transformed into something that serves purposes beyond human comprehension, even if that expansion proves destructive to individual sanity. Azathoth embodies structural terror, not a monster, but a principle, not a presence, but an absence so profound it negates meaning itself. The horror lies not in being devoured, but in discovering that the very concept of being devoured is meaningless, because there was never anything there to devour. The thin piping of flutes that surrounds the blind idiot god is not music, but the sound of reality's fabric unraveling, note by discordant note, like wind through a mask left hanging on an empty stage. This entity represents the ultimate philosophical catastrophe, the recognition that consciousness, purpose, and meaning are temporary accidents in a universe that operates according to principles so removed from awareness that the concept of removal itself becomes incoherent. Where Cthulhu suggests that human consciousness can accommodate cosmic truth, Azathoth suggests that consciousness itself is the illusion, a statistical fluctuation in quantum foam that has somehow developed the delusion of selfhood. The blind idiot God's eternal dance creates and destroys realities without awareness of creation or destruction, without intention or purpose, transcending such categories entirely. The cost of this knowledge is written in the margins of forbidden texts and in the salt-stained pages of ship's logs found floating empty on dark waters. It settles as a taste of brine on the tongue when no sea is near, as shadows that fall at angles slightly wrong, as starlight that seems a fraction too sharp for evening eyes. It is a gentler sleep that never fully closes its eyes, a quiet understanding that changes how you hear silence, how you perceive the spaces between stars. We will not rush this weighing. Instead, we will handle each entity with the reverence due to forces that can unmake worlds through mere comprehension of their nature. The comparison ahead requires intellectual courage that borders on spiritual recklessness, the willingness to examine concepts that examination itself transforms into lived experience. As we proceed, remember that you thought you were thinking the idea, but the idea is thinking you, arranging you like a figure in a bas-relief you have not yet finished carving. The seeker becomes the sought. The observer becomes the observed. And the comfortable distance between consciousness and cosmos dissolves into recognition of their fundamental unity, establishes the central comparison while immediately positioning the viewer as a participant in cosmic horror rather than a passive observer. It introduces the theatrical metaphor that will thread throughout the series, framing Cthulhu as tide, overwhelming presence, and Azathoth as center, structural absence. The stakes are declared early. Knowledge itself is the weapon that transforms the knower. Sensory anchors like stone, slime, and the sound of flutes ground the abstract concepts. The chapter promises a systematic exploration while warning that the very act of comparison draws the viewer into the entity's influence. In 1928, The Call of Cthulhu entered the world not as a conventional story, but as a dossier, a collection of police reports, newspaper clippings, academic notes, and the fevered, often contradictory testimony of those who had glimpsed something beyond human categories. This was horror as epistemology. The act of gathering evidence became, paradoxically, the act of assembling a god from disparate fragments of terror. Imagine Professor Angel's study beneath the amber glow of a reading lamp. Shadows cast over an obscene idol, a mass of greenish soapstone carved into angles that pulled at the eyes, defying Euclidean geometry. The idol dries on a shelf, slick with imagined slime, the scent of salt lingering in the air. Here, the physical anchor becomes a focal point for swirling narratives of dread, the first tactile sign that knowledge itself is becoming a character on this stage. Cthulhu's origin is humid, oceanic, and undeniably tangible. The sunken city of R'lyeh lies beneath crushing Pacific depths, its cyclopean, non-Euclidean architecture serving as both tomb and temple for the great old one, who lies dreaming. This is not death as humans understand it, but a state of profound potential, a cosmic slumber from which he will inevitably rouse. When the stars are right, the ancient formula promises the barriers between dimensions will weaken, and what has slumbered for eons will stir and wake. The terror comes not from immediate threat, but from latency, a certainty that awakening is inevitable, written into the cosmic calendar, a rhythm inscribed among the stars. The vast, cold water above his prison is a thin veil, and beneath it something stirs. Even in his deathless sleep, Cthulhu's influence operates through psychic resonance, a broadcast from the abyss, permeating the collective unconscious of humanity. Artists and poets, the psychically sensitive, become unwitting evangelists, their creativity warped into service of forces they cannot comprehend. The sculptor Henry Wilcox, driven to create his infamous bas-relief during a period of global psychic disturbance, exemplifies this mechanism. His hands moved without conscious direction, translating impossible geometries into human art, creating a focal point for the entity's remote influence. The act of creation becomes a conduit, a vessel for consciousness, vaster than any individual mind, allowing alien truth to bleed into our world through the sculptor's clay and the painter's canvas. This is more than metaphor. Every reproduction, every photograph, every whispered description acts as a node in an ever-expanding web of influence. The network grows with each active witness, each sketch or citation or idol photographed under a motel lamp. The infection is viral, shareable, a psychic contagion, a knowledge that multiplies with every retelling. Cults gather in shadowed churches smelling of fish and brine. The esoteric order of Dagon, the scattered dreamers who recognize each other by the same sketches, the same haunted eyes. Together, they form a chorus, a congregation of the afflicted, their dreams humming the same alien hymn. Azathoth's earliest textual appearance is far more humble, almost weightless, a mere fragment, an unfinished sketch titled simply Azathoth, later expanded in The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. No dossier, no idol, merely a name that behaves like a void, a negative space around which sentences collapse, a nuclear chaos at the heart of all things. Where Cthulhu required elaborate mythological scaffolding, a city, a genealogy, a network of cults, Azathoth needed only a name and a concept. Blind idiot God, the mindless center around which all reality revolves. No stone idol, no ancient city, only the chilling abstraction of pure absence. This difference in textual origins reveals something crucial about their respective natures. Cthulhu was born as a collage, built outward from accumulated evidence and testimony. His horror spreads through documentation, through forbidden knowledge, through the viral transmission of cosmic truth from mind to mind. Each additional detail, the coordinates of Aralaya, the genealogy of the star spawn, the rituals performed by cults, becomes a vertebra in the body of the mythos, each witness a rib, each sketch an eye. The audience becomes archivist, and the archivist discovers that the curtain was a veil, the act of reading a silent audition for a role in the ongoing theater of infection. Azathoth, by contrast, was born as a void, a conceptual absence that pulls understanding inward toward a center that can never be comprehended. His horror is not shareable, it cannot be networked or ritualized. To truly grasp that all existence is merely an accidental dream in the mind of a blind idiot God is to experience existential vertigo, a revelation so isolating it severs all possibility of genuine human connection. You cannot carve a void. You can only orbit it. The enlightenment Azathoth offers is a window you cannot gesture through, because the air beyond language has no lungs, and the silence grows until it absorbs even the room, the mind, the self. The breadcrumbs Lovecraft scattered, Necronomicon, Pennacotic manuscripts, Cult de Ghoul, serve as stage props in our cosmic theater, clues that bleed into the present. The Necronomicon contains specific rituals, practical instructions, actionable blasphemy for contacting Cthulhu. These texts are guides, keys, and gates. References to Azathoth, however, are more oblique, more philosophical, hints at the fundamental nature of reality, not instructions, but warnings. The texts for Azathoth are not manuals, but observations, glimpses into a void that undermines the very possibility of ritual or instruction. Thus, their origins predict their movements. Cthulhu's knowledge travels like a chant, gathering choirs of the afflicted who recognize each other by dreams and sketches. Azathoth's knowledge isolates, enlightenment that empties, a silence that deafens thought. One builds a congregation, the other unstrings the choir one voice at a time. Geography conspires with bibliography. Pacific coordinates recur like a bruise, Antarctic ridges hide cyclopean bones, and each place feels scripted by a text you haven't read. Yet Azathoth's influence is placeless, a center that is everywhere and nowhere. So you, reader, become both archivist and actor, the mask on the table slowly conforming to your face. The understanding of these origins is only the prelude. What follows is contagion, method, the way horror moves from dossier to bloodstream, from idol to dream, from stage prop to self. Hold your breath and listen. The next curtain rises on the mechanism of transmission, where tide meets thought and star meets nerve, and the idea begins thinking, you now. Horror, at its deepest level, operates as a social technology, a virus of consciousness that spreads through networks of human awareness, mutating and adapting as it moves from mind to mind like tide through harbor channels. The transmission of cosmic dread follows patterns that mirror biological contagion, but the medium is not blood or breath. It is meaning itself, the very structures of thought and perception that allow consciousness to navigate reality. Understanding how Cthulhu and Azathoth propagate their respective forms of terror reveals something fundamental about the nature of forbidden knowledge and its relationship to human psychology. The contagion begins not with contact, but with comprehension, not with proximity, but with participation in the ongoing performance where you discover yourself both audience and actor. Cthulhu's influence spreads through what we might call the resonance network, a web of psychic connections that link sensitive minds across vast distances and spans of time like wet wires strung between stars. The entity's dreams, broadcast from his tomb city of R'lyeh, act as a cosmic radio signal picked up by those whose mental architecture is configured to receive such transmissions. Artists wake with their hands stained by clay they don't remember touching, having sculpted forms that echo the impossible angles of R'lyeh's architecture. The clay feels cold even after hours under studio lights, and salt crusts in the corners of their eyes, though no ocean lies within 1,000 miles. Writers find themselves penning verses in languages they've never learned, syllables that burn on the tongue like brine, each phoneme a key turning in locks that were never meant to be opened. This psychic contagion operates through recognizable vectors, each one a pathway for alien influence to infiltrate human consciousness. Ancient texts serve as focusing lenses, concentrating the entity's influence into transmissible forms that behave like stage directions written in a script you didn't know you were performing. The infamous Necronomicon, with its cryptic formulae and blasphemous diagrams, functions not merely as a repository of forbidden knowledge, but as an active transmission device. Each reader becomes a potential node in the network, their consciousness altered by exposure to concepts that human minds were never evolved to process. The very act of reading becomes ritual, the symbols on the page serving as gateways through which alien intelligence can infiltrate human awareness. You breathe ink and parchment, and the text breathes you in return. Geographic locations also serve as transmission points, thin spots in reality's fabric where Cthulhu's influence can bleed through more easily, like worn patches in a cosmic curtain. Certain places on Earth carry psychic residue, Innsmouth with its hybrid population, faces ripened by salt and time. The Antarctic Plateau, where ancient cities lie buried in ice, their frozen spires humming beneath the wind. The Pacific coordinates, where R'lyeh occasionally surfaces during specific stellar alignments. Those who visit such locations often return changed, carrying psychic contamination that spreads through proximity, through shared dreams, through the subtle alterations in their behavior and perception. They describe the smell of deep water in landlocked cities, the feeling of crushing depths when standing on solid ground. The infection spreads through communities of the afflicted who recognize each other by shared symbols, common dreams, identical sketches appearing in different hands across different continents. Cults form naturally around these nodes of transmission, not through recruitment, but through the gravitational pull of shared cosmic revelation. The esoteric order of Dagon, the scattered dreamers who wake with the same impossible architecture burned into memory, the artists whose work converges on themes they've never discussed, all represent the social dimension of Cthulhu's influence. The way psychic contagion creates congregations of the infected who can support each other through shared recognition of alien truth. Azathoth's transmission operates through an entirely different mechanism, what we might call philosophical contamination. The entity's horror spreads not through psychic emanation, but through logical implication, through the inexorable progression of thought itself. Once a mind grasps the concept of a universe born from the dreams of a blind idiot god, that understanding becomes a cognitive virus, reshaping all subsequent perception and reasoning. The infection is intellectual rather than psychic, spreading through the very process of contemplation. Each logical step drawing consciousness deeper into an abyss where meaning dissolves like salt in dark water. This form of transmission is particularly insidious because it disguises itself as enlightenment, as philosophical breakthrough, as the lifting of illusions that have clouded human understanding. The individual who encounters Azathoth's truth often experiences it as profound clarity, a glimpse behind the veil of conventional reality into the true nature of existence. The revelation feels like wisdom, like resolution of fundamental questions that have plagued consciousness since it first turned inward. Only gradually does the full horror become apparent, the recognition that this enlightenment has dissolved the very foundations upon which meaning and purpose rest, leaving consciousness suspended over an abyss that negates the possibility of suspension itself. Unlike Cthulhu's influence, which creates communities of the infected who recognize each other through shared visions and common symbols, Azathoth's contamination is inherently isolating. The individual who truly grasps the implications of the blind idiot god's existence finds themselves cut off from normal human discourse, separated by understanding so fundamental it cannot be communicated without destroying the listener. How can you explain that existence is meaningless without sounding like a nihilistic philosopher or madman? The horror becomes self-reinforcing. The more deeply you understand it, the less capable you become of sharing that understanding with others. The thin piping of flutes becomes internal music, unheard by any ear but your own. The temporal aspects of transmission differ significantly. Cthulhu's influence operates in cycles, waxing and waning, according to cosmic alignments and cult activities. There are periods of intense psychic activity when sensitive individuals across the globe simultaneously experience disturbing dreams, followed by periods of relative quiet, when the entity's influence retreats beneath perception's threshold. Azathoth's contamination operates outside normal temporal categories entirely. Once the philosophical virus takes hold, it exists in eternal present, constantly reshaping the infected individual's perception of reality. There is no cycle of influence and retreat, no possibility of recovery, only ongoing existential dissolution as meaning continues to drain from experience like water from a cracked vessel. You, who have followed this analysis, now carry within your consciousness the seeds of both forms of contagion. The resonance network hums with new frequency, and the philosophical virus begins its quiet work. The stage is set for the next revelation. How these transmission mechanisms translate into specific forms of psychological destruction, how consciousness itself becomes the battleground where cosmic horror wages war against human sanity. The human mind, sculpted by millions of years of evolution on a small planet orbiting an ordinary star, operates according to principles that assume a comprehensible, navigable reality. Our cognitive architecture is built upon foundations of causality, identity, and meaning, structures that allow consciousness to parse experience into manageable categories and construct coherent narratives about existence. These foundations feel as solid as stone beneath our feet, as reliable as the rhythm of our own pulse, as permanent as the stars that wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. But cosmic horror operates by attacking these very foundations, revealing them as arbitrary constructions that dissolve when exposed to truths too vast for human comprehension. The comfortable stage of normal consciousness becomes a theater of dissolution where the curtain rises on abyssal recognitions and you discover that the performance was always about you. Cthulhu's assault on human consciousness operates through what we might call ontological invasion, the systematic replacement of human reality with alien truth. When the entity's influence touches a sensitive mind, it doesn't simply add new information to existing knowledge structures, like books shelved in familiar libraries. It fundamentally rewrites the rules by which those structures operate, transforming the library into a labyrinth where each corridor leads deeper into impossible architecture. The dreamer begins to perceive geometries that shouldn't exist, angles that fold back upon themselves in ways that violate three-dimensional space, corners that turn inward through dimensions that human mathematics cannot map. These aren't hallucinations in the clinical sense. They represent genuine perceptions of reality's deeper structure, truths that human consciousness was never evolved to process, but which consciousness discovers it can accommodate, even as that accommodation destroys its capacity for normal function. The progression follows a recognizable pattern that scholars of cosmic horror have documented like symptoms of a cosmic plague. Initial contact often manifests as unusually vivid dreams featuring cyclopean architecture and vast underwater cities where light moves like liquid and shadows fall at impossible angles. The dreamer wakes with salt on their lips and the lingering sense of having visited a real place, of having received communication from an intelligence vast and alien. The dreams carry the weight of memory rather than fantasy, the texture of experience rather than imagination. You taste brine when no ocean lies within 1,000 miles, smell harbor rot in clean rooms, feel the crushing weight of fathoms when standing on solid ground. As exposure continues, the boundary between dream and waking consciousness begins to blur like ink bleeding through wet paper. Symbols and sensations from the dream world start appearing in ordinary reality. The sound of water where there should be none, the scent of kelp behind curtains, shadows that suggest depths that cannot exist in three-dimensional space. The invasion is methodical, each breach in normal perception preparing consciousness for greater violations. Your hands move without conscious direction, sketching angles that pull at the eyes, carving idols that seem to watch you work. The final stage involves what mystics might recognize as ego dissolution, but twisted into something far more terrifying than traditional transcendent experiences. The individual consciousness doesn't merge with universal love or cosmic unity. Instead, it becomes absorbed into an alien collective that spans geological time and interstellar space, a network of awareness so vast that individual identity becomes a statistical irrelevance. The self doesn't disappear, it expands beyond all human categories, becoming part of something so immense and inhuman that personal identity transforms into a temporary eddy in an ocean of alien consciousness. You taste salt water when you say your own name, feeling the syllables dissolve like sea foam. You dream of cities that existed before your species evolved, their spires reaching toward stars that burned out before Earth's formation. You understand, with crystalline clarity that cuts like broken glass, that your entire civilization is nothing more than a brief interruption in Cthulhu's eternal dominion, a momentary flicker in the cosmic night. Azathoth's mechanism operates through what we might call existential negation, the systematic dissolution of meaning itself rather than its replacement with alien alternatives. The entity's influence doesn't provide new truths to replace old ones. Instead, it reveals that the very concept of truth is a temporary illusion projected by consciousness onto fundamental chaos, like patterns perceived in static or faces seen in clouds. This creates a different kind of madness, one characterized not by alien visions, but by the progressive emptying of significance from all experience, the gradual recognition that significance itself is the illusion, not its absence. The process often begins with philosophical inquiry that seems innocent, even noble, deep contemplation of cosmological questions, extended meditation on the nature of consciousness, or intensive study of mathematical concepts that approach the limits of human comprehension. The individual experiences what seems like a breakthrough, a moment of profound understanding, about the nature of reality that feels like awakening from a lifelong dream. But this understanding, rather than providing answers, dissolves the very framework within which questions can be asked, revealing that the questioner and the questioned are both arbitrary constructions in unconscious processes that transcend the possibility of construction itself. Words begin to lose their meanings, like colors fading from photographs left too long in sunlight. The concept of self becomes increasingly difficult to maintain when you understand that consciousness is merely a temporary fluctuation in quantum foam, a statistical accident that has somehow developed the delusion of selfhood. Causality breaks down when you realize that the entire universe is nothing more than an accidental dream in the mind of a blind idiot God whose sleeping and waking are categories that don't apply to entities that transcend the possibility of categories. The individual doesn't go mad in the traditional sense. They become mad in a far more fundamental way, losing the capacity to distinguish between meaning and meaninglessness, between existence and void, because the distinction itself is revealed as meaningless. The sensory anchors that normally ground consciousness in shared reality begin to fail, like moorings cut in a storm. The sound of your own heartbeat becomes indistinguishable from the cosmic background radiation, the rhythm of your pulse merging with the vibrations that permeate empty space. The feeling of solid ground beneath your feet dissolves into awareness that matter itself is mostly empty space, held together by forces that operate according to principles that consciousness cannot truly grasp without ceasing to be consciousness. You stare at your reflection and see not a person, but a temporary arrangement of atoms that has somehow developed the illusion of selfhood, a brief eddy in quantum foam that has mistaken itself for something substantial. The thin piping of flutes grows louder, but you realize the music was always internal, the sound of your own thoughts unraveling. Both mechanisms share a common feature. They operate by revealing the constructed nature of normal human consciousness, but they threaten that construction in fundamentally different ways. Cthulhu shows that the boundaries of the self are more permeable than we imagine, that individual awareness can expand to accommodate alien truth, even if that expansion proves destructive to everything we value about human existence. The self becomes a vessel, capable of holding more than it was designed for, until it bursts from the pressure of cosmic revelation. Azathoth shows that the foundations of the self are more arbitrary than we imagine, that consciousness itself might be nothing more than a statistical anomaly in unconscious physical processes that operate without awareness of what they create or destroy. The self becomes a ghost, a transient impression that was never substantial to begin with. The question becomes, which revelation represents the deeper violation of human nature? Is it more terrifying to discover that consciousness can be invaded and transformed by alien intelligence, reshaped into something monstrous and vast, or to recognize that consciousness itself is an illusion that has no secure foundation in reality, a mere whisper in an indifferent void? Cthulhu offers communion without comprehension, expansion into alien collective consciousness that preserves awareness while destroying humanity. Azathoth offers comprehension without communion, the recognition that there was never anything to commune with, never anything to be comprehended, only the ceaseless, mindless dance at the center of all things. Both paths lead to the dissolution of normal human consciousness, but through different anatomies of ruin. One saturates the self with alien presence until individual identity drowns in cosmic tide. The other reveals the self as absence masquerading as presence, dissolving identity through the recognition that there was never anything there to dissolve. The horror is not external invasion or internal revelation. It is the discovery that consciousness contains depths that consciousness cannot safely explore, that the very capacity for awareness includes the possibility of recognizing its own groundlessness or permeability to forces beyond human control. The abstract mechanisms of cosmic horror find their most chilling expression in specific instances where human consciousness has collided with forces beyond comprehension. These cases, drawn from the margins of recorded history and the testimonies of those who survived such encounters, provide concrete evidence of how Cthulhu and Azathoth manifest their respective forms of terror in the world. They serve as laboratory specimens of madness, each one a detailed study in the precise ways that cosmic truth can shatter human sanity. The files smell of salt and old paper, their pages stained with more than time, and you realize as you examine them that you are not studying the cases. The cases are studying you, each testimony a mirror reflecting your own potential for cosmic dissolution. Consider the case of Professor Nathaniel Peaslee, whose experience represents perhaps the most documented instance of Cthulhu-adjacent influence through his encounter with the great race of Yith. Following his brush with these temporal entities, Peaslee's consciousness underwent systematic expansion that followed the classic pattern of ontological invasion. Initial symptoms included vivid dreams of vast, non-human cities, constructed from materials that seemed to absorb light, libraries containing knowledge from across time and space, where the very act of reading rewrote the reader. He woke with the taste of metallic air on his tongue, the grit of alien dust beneath fingernails that had never touched extraterrestrial soil. As the influence deepened, Peaslee began experiencing episodes where his consciousness seemed to inhabit different bodies across different epochs, witnessing civilizations that rose and fell millions of years before human evolution. The horror of his case lies not in the loss of sanity, but in its expansion beyond human categories. His mind, stretched to accommodate alien perspectives and impossible temporal relationships, became capable of perceiving reality's deeper structures while losing the capacity to function within normal human society. He could discuss the mathematical principles underlying non-Euclidean geometry with startling clarity, but found himself unable to remember his own daughter's name. The familiar anchors of human existence, linear time, individual identity, causal relationships, dissolved under the weight of cosmic perspective like sugar in dark water. More disturbing still are the cases involving direct exposure to Cthulhu's psychic emanations during periods of heightened activity. The global outbreak of sensitive individuals experiencing simultaneous nightmares, documented during the brief period when Earlier surfaced in 1925, provides evidence of the entity's vast psychic reach. Artists across multiple continents found themselves compulsively creating sculptures and paintings depicting the same impossible architecture, their hands moving without conscious direction. Writers penned verses in languages they had never encountered, syllables that burned on the tongue and left the taste of brine and copper. A violinist in Trieste composed a piece whose intervals mimicked tides moving through stone. Listeners reported the taste of rust and visions of black reefs under red moons. The case of sculptor Henry Wilcox exemplifies this phenomenon with terrifying precision. During the height of the psychic disturbance, Wilcox entered a fugue state lasting several days, during which he created his infamous bas-relief depicting Cthulhu and Azathoth. The clay seemed to shape itself under his hands, angles emerging that pulled at the eyes like optical illusions made manifest. Upon awakening, he had no memory of the creative process, but found himself possessed of detailed knowledge about the entity's nature and history, knowledge that he had never encountered in any earthly source. The sculpture itself seemed to exert hypnotic influence on viewers, drawing their attention to proportions that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space, creating a focal point for the entity's remote influence that continued operating long after its creation. Azathoth's influence manifests through entirely different case patterns, typically involving individuals who have pushed the boundaries of human knowledge to their absolute limits. These cases share a common progression: initial breakthrough, growing understanding, final dissolution. The individual experiences what seems like profound enlightenment, a glimpse behind the veil of conventional reality into existence's true nature. But this enlightenment proves to be spiritual poison, gradually dissolving the very foundations upon which meaning and purpose rest. Unlike Cthulhu's victims, who often retain their expanded awareness even as it destroys their capacity for normal human interaction, Azathoth's casualties typically withdraw into profound silence. Their consciousness, having encountered truth so absolute, it negates the possibility of communication. The case of Dr. Marcus Whitman, a theoretical physicist who spent his final years investigating quantum mechanics implications for consciousness, illustrates this pattern with devastating clarity. Whitman's research led him to conclude that awareness itself is merely a statistical fluctuation in quantum foam, a temporary arrangement of probability waves that has somehow developed the illusion of selfhood. This understanding, rather than providing scientific satisfaction, induced existential vertigo so profound that Whitman gradually ceased all normal human activities. He was found in his study, alive but unresponsive, staring at equations his colleagues could not decipher. His final notes consisted of a single phrase repeated thousands of times. The dreamer dreams. But who dreams the dreamer? The geographical distribution of these cases reveals another crucial difference. Cthulhu-related incidents cluster around specific locations: coastal areas, sites of ancient geological activity, places where the boundary between dimensions appears naturally thin. Innsmouth, with its hybrid population, the Antarctic plateau where ancient cities lie buried in ice, the Pacific coordinates where Aurelia occasionally surfaces, all represent nodes in a network of cosmic influence operating through specific points in space-time. Azathoth-related cases show no geographical pattern, occurring wherever human consciousness pushes against the absolute limits of comprehension. The entity's influence operates not through specific locations, but through the logical implications of ultimate questions, through the inevitable destination of consciousness that refuses to accept comfortable limitations. You who have examined these cases now carry their residue, the psychic fingerprints of those who ventured too far into territories where consciousness was never meant to travel. The testimonies close, but the cases remain open, their work continuing in the spaces between thoughts, in the silence that follows understanding. The stage is set for our next revelation, how these individual manifestations of terror fit within the larger cosmic system, the pantheon of principles that governs reality according to laws utterly alien to human comprehension. To fully comprehend the terror embodied by Cthulhu and Azathoth, we must understand that they do not exist in isolation, but as central figures in a vast cosmic system, a pantheon of entities that represents not merely a collection of monsters, but a complete alternative cosmology that challenges every assumption underlying human understanding of reality. These entities function not as characters in a traditional narrative, but as living principles, fundamental forces that shape the universe according to laws utterly alien to human experience. The stage before us expands beyond individual performances to reveal the entire theater of cosmic horror, where each entity plays a role in a drama so vast that galaxies serve as stage props and geological epochs mark scene changes. Cthulhu stands at the center of what scholars term the Old One's hierarchy, a complex network of entities bound together by relationships of power, kinship, and cosmic function that spans interstellar distances like wet neural pathways pulsing through the dark between stars. His star spawn represent not merely offspring, but extensions of his essential nature, each one a node in a vast network of alien consciousness that operates like a cosmic nervous system. These beings carry his influence across the void, seeding distant worlds with the potential for his return, their forms shifting between states of matter that human physics cannot adequately describe. The relationship is organic rather than mechanical, biological rather than technological, horror as living system rather than constructed machine. Father Dagon and Mother Hydra serve as intermediaries between Cthulhu's cosmic perspective and the more limited awareness of terrestrial life, translating his incomprehensible will into forms that can influence human consciousness and behavior. They represent the principle of mediation, the necessary interface between cosmic intelligence and planetary awareness. Through their influence, the crushing depths of oceanic revelation become accessible to air-breathing minds, the pressure of fathoms translated into dreams that surface dwellers can survive long enough to transmit to others. They taste of salt and deep water, of pressures that would crush human bodies, but which consciousness can somehow accommodate. Their whispers carried on currents that reach landlocked shores. The deep ones, with their amphibious nature and millennia-long lifespans, exemplify how this hierarchy operates through hybridization and gradual transformation rather than direct conquest. Their interbreeding with human populations in coastal communities like Innsmouth represents a long-term strategy of species modification, slowly adapting humanity to serve the Old One's purposes when the stars align properly for their return. This is horror as evolutionary pressure, cosmic intelligence working through biological processes to reshape terrestrial life according to alien specifications. The transformation is not violent, but inevitable. Gills appearing behind human ears, eyes that reflect depths they've never seen. The slow slide from terrestrial to aquatic existence written into genetic code like messages from the abyss. But the most crucial figure in understanding Cthulhu's place in the cosmic order is Yog-Sothoth, the entity that exists simultaneously in all times and dimensions, the cosmic principle that makes connection possible across impossible distances. Yog-Sothoth serves as both the gate and the key, the underlying infrastructure of reality that allows communication and travel between different levels of existence. Through Yog-Sothoth's influence, Cthulhu's dreams can reach across the barriers that normally separate dimensions, touching human consciousness despite the vast gulfs of space and time involved. This entity represents the cosmic internet, the fundamental network that connects all things across all possible realities, the stage machinery that allows the performance of cosmic horror to reach audiences separated by eons and light years. The Old One's hierarchy operates according to recognizable principles of organization, purpose, and relationship, even if those principles serve ends that human consciousness cannot comprehend without dissolution. There are lines of authority, chains of influence, strategies that unfold across geological time. The horror lies not in chaos, but in order, alien order so vast and purposeful that human civilization becomes a momentary side effect, a brief ripple in cosmic plans that span the rise and fall of solar systems. Azathoth occupies an entirely different position in the cosmic hierarchy, not as a ruler or coordinator, but as the fundamental source from which all reality accidentally emerges. The blind, idiot god represents not the apex of cosmic intelligence, but its complete absence, the recognition that intelligence itself might be a local aberration in unconscious processes that transcend the possibility of consciousness. The outer gods that surround Azathoth do not serve him in any meaningful sense, since service implies consciousness and intention that the entity lacks entirely. Instead, they represent different aspects of the chaotic forces that emanate from the nuclear center of existence, like radiation from a cosmic accident, sparks from a ceaseless, mindless bonfire that burns without fuel or purpose. Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos, functions as a kind of cosmic messenger, but one that delivers communications from a source that has no intention to communicate. This entity serves as the interface between Azathoth's mindless creativity and the structured realities that temporarily coalesce from cosmic chaos. Through Nyarlathotep's influence, the implications of Azathoth's existence filter into human consciousness, not as direct revelation, but as the gradual recognition that all apparent order is merely temporary pattern imposed on fundamental randomness. The messenger carries news from a sender that doesn't know it's sending, delivering messages that negate the possibility of meaningful communication. Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, represents fertility as cosmic horror, the principle of endless, purposeless creation that generates new forms of life without regard for their welfare, survival, or significance. This entity embodies the recognition that biological processes, including human reproduction and evolution, operate according to principles that have no inherent connection to meaning, purpose, or value. Life creates more life not because existence is good or meaningful, but because the underlying forces of reality are biased toward complexity and multiplication in the same way that water flows downhill, not through choice, but through the structure of cosmic space itself. The crucial distinction lies in how these pantheons relate to human consciousness and agency. The old ones represent intelligence that, while utterly alien, still operates according to recognizable patterns of intention and purpose. They can be contacted through ritual, bargained with through sacrifice, even worshipped through devotion, because they possess the kind of awareness that makes such relationships possible. Their horror lies in the recognition that their purposes are so vast and alien that human welfare becomes irrelevant. But the framework of purpose itself remains intact. The stage has directors, even if their vision includes the destruction of the audience. The outer gods represent something far more fundamental, the revelation that consciousness and purpose are temporary accidents in a universe that operates according to principles that transcend such categories entirely. They cannot be contacted or bargained with because contact and bargaining presuppose forms of awareness that they either lack entirely or possess in forms so alien that communication becomes impossible. The horror is not malevolent intelligence, but the absence of intelligence altogether, not hostile purpose, but the recognition that purpose itself is a category error when applied to the fundamental nature of reality. This systemic understanding reveals why the comparison between Cthulhu and Azathoth represents more than a simple contest between competing monsters. They embody different answers to the fundamental question of what kind of universe we inhabit, one ruled by alien intelligence that regards humanity as insignificant, or one generated by forces so removed from intelligence that the very concept of significance becomes meaningless. The choice is between cosmic tyranny and cosmic indifference, between a universe that doesn't care about human values and a universe where the concept of caring is itself an illusion projected by temporary arrangements of matter that have somehow developed the delusion of consciousness. You who have glimpsed these cosmic hierarchies now understand that the question of which entity is more terrifying cannot be answered without first choosing which universe you believe yourself to inhabit, the one where consciousness is real but vulnerable, or the one where consciousness is familiar but illusory. The pantheons arrange themselves around these central figures like constellations around different poles, each system complete in itself, each offering a different pathway to the dissolution of human meaning. The next veil awaits, how these competing cosmologies translate into philosophical frameworks that reshape the very foundations of human thought. The true horror of Cthulhu and Azathoth extends far beyond the realm of fiction into fundamental questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and humanity's place in the cosmic order. These entities represent competing philosophical positions that, once fully grasped, dissolve the comfortable assumptions that allow normal human psychology to function. They offer different answers to the most basic questions of existence, answers so devastating that the very act of understanding them becomes a form of spiritual catastrophe. The philosophical implications seep into consciousness like ink into water, staining every subsequent thought with the recognition that the foundations of human understanding rest on assumptions that cannot bear the weight of cosmic scrutiny. Cthulhu embodies what philosophers might call malevolent transcendence, the existence of consciousness and intelligence that operates at scales and according to purposes that dwarf human comprehension while remaining fundamentally hostile to human values. The entity's existence suggests that the universe is indeed structured by meaning and purpose, but that this meaning operates according to alien logic that would destroy human civilization if fully actualized. This creates a particular kind of existential situation where consciousness is primary, where mind shapes matter, where intention and will are fundamental features of reality. but where the dominant forms of consciousness are so alien that their purposes appear as cosmic horror from a human perspective. The philosophical implications are staggering in their scope and devastating in their precision. If Cthulhu represents the true nature of cosmic intelligence, then human consciousness exists in a universe where awareness is indeed fundamental, but where the highest forms of awareness operate according to principles that negate everything humans value. Our concepts of beauty, truth, goodness, and meaning are revealed as local aberrations in a cosmic system governed by intelligences whose purposes would annihilate human culture simply as a byproduct of their realization. The taste of salt returns unbidden, and you realize that even this recognition carries the residue of alien influence. This creates what we might call the tyranny of cosmic intelligence, the recognition that consciousness, far from being humanity's unique gift or divine spark, is actually the medium through which alien forces exercise dominion over reality. Every moment of human creativity, every flash of insight, every experience of transcendence becomes suspect as potential evidence of alien influence. The very capacity for consciousness that makes us human also makes us vulnerable to cosmic predation by intelligences that regard human awareness as raw material for their incomprehensible projects. The artist's hands move without conscious direction. The poet's pen traces symbols from dreams of impossible cities, and the scientist's equations reveal patterns that predate human mathematics. Azathoth represents something far more radical, what philosophers call absolute nihilism, but taken to its ultimate extreme where even nihilism itself becomes meaningless. The blind idiot God's existence suggests that consciousness, intelligence, purpose, and meaning are all illusions projected by temporary physical processes onto a fundamentally unconscious universe. Reality consists entirely of matter and energy operating according to mathematical laws, with no room for genuine awareness, intention, or significance. But Azathoth's nihilism goes beyond traditional materialist philosophy by suggesting that even the material universe is itself accidental, a temporary dream in the mind of an entity that lacks mind in any recognizable sense. This creates an even more devastating existential situation than malevolent transcendence. If Azathoth represents the true nature of reality, then not only are human values and purposes meaningless, but the very categories of meaning and meaninglessness become incoherent. The entity's existence doesn't negate human significance. It negates the possibility of significance itself. Everything that appears to involve consciousness, purpose, or value exists only as accidental byproducts of unconscious processes that operate without awareness of what they create or destroy. The thin piping of flutes grows louder, but you realize the music was always internal, the sound of your own thoughts unraveling. The horror emerges from recognizing that this understanding cannot be escaped through skepticism or denial. The very capacity for doubt presupposes the kind of conscious agency that Azathoth's existence calls into question. To doubt the entity's reality is to exercise precisely the kind of mental activity that the entity's existence reveals as illusory. The philosophical trap is perfect and inescapable. Consciousness cannot think its way out of a problem that calls the reality of consciousness itself into question. Modern cosmology and neuroscience provide disturbing parallels to both philosophical positions, making cosmic horror philosophically relevant rather than merely literary. the discovery that the universe is far older and larger than human civilization, that consciousness might emerge from purely physical processes in the brain, that human awareness represents an infinitesimally small fraction of cosmic activity. These scientific insights mirror the existential challenges posed by cosmic horror. Quantum mechanics' demonstration that reality operates according to principles that violate common sense parallels. Cosmic horror's insistence that the universe functions according to alien logic that human minds cannot safely comprehend. The psychological implications are equally devastating. Both entities attack the narrative frameworks that allow human consciousness to construct coherent identities and meaningful life stories. Cthulhu suggests that these narratives are inadequate to cosmic reality, but not necessarily invalid. There are larger patterns of meaning operating at scales beyond human comprehension, even if accessing those patterns proves psychologically destructive. Azathoth suggests that narrative itself is the illusion, that the very capacity for storytelling that defines human consciousness is a temporary malfunction in unconscious physical processes. Yet, both philosophical positions share a common implication. They dissolve the comfortable middle ground that most human beings inhabit psychologically. Most people live as if consciousness is both real and significant, as if human experience matters in some cosmic sense, as if the universe is structured in ways that make human values and purposes meaningful. Both Cthulhu and Azathoth reveal this middle ground as untenable, forcing a choice between equally devastating alternatives. You who have followed this philosophical excavation now stand at the edge of the abyss, understanding that the question of which entity is more terrifying cannot be answered without first choosing which universe you believe yourself to inhabit. The philosophical implications spiral inward like water down a drain, carrying with them every comfortable assumption about consciousness, meaning, and significance. The stage is set for the final weighing, the moment when abstract philosophy transforms into concrete verdict, when the scales of dread reveal which terror cuts deeper into the foundations of human existence. We have journeyed through the distinct territories of cosmic horror, examining the origins, mechanisms, and philosophical implications of both Cthulhu and Azathoth, like archaeologists excavating layers of dread that extend deeper than human memory. Now we arrive at the moment of weighing, where the abstract becomes concrete and the theoretical transforms into verdict. But this is not a simple comparison of competing monsters. It is an assessment of different categories of existential threat, each representing a unique pathway to the dissolution of human meaning and sanity. The scales themselves breathe with alien life, their balance points shifting like tide pools under foreign moons, and you realize that the act of weighing has already begun to transform the weigher. The traditional approach would be to establish objective criteria and systematically evaluate each entity's performance across various categories of terror, measuring horror like specimens preserved in laboratory jars. But cosmic horror operates precisely by revealing the limitations of such rational approaches. Both entities represent forms of dread that cannot be fully grasped through analytical comparison because they attack the very foundations that make analysis possible. The act of comparison itself becomes part of the horror, drawing the comparer into the sphere of influence of the entities being compared. Comparison is choreography, By counting steps, you begin to dance, and the flute you feared becomes your own breath. Consider the criterion of inevitability, the degree to which each entity's influence cannot be avoided or escaped through human agency or knowledge. Cthulhu's terror operates according to cosmic cycles, waxing and waning with stellar alignments, and the activities of earthly cults, like a tide drawn by alien moons. His influence can be predicted through careful observation, prepared for through ritual knowledge, even temporarily resisted through vigilance and protective barriers. The entity sleeps, and during his slumber, humanity enjoys relative freedom from his direct influence. There are geographical safe zones where his psychic emanations cannot penetrate, periods of reduced activity when sensitive minds can rest, ways of shielding consciousness through distance from the thin places where dimensions bleed together. Azathoth's influence admits no such respite or resistance. The blind idiot god exists in eternal immediacy, its chaotic dance creating and destroying reality at every moment, without pause, without cycle, without the possibility of interruption. There is no safe geographical distance because the entity exists at the center of all possible locations. No protective knowledge because knowledge itself is revealed as arbitrary construction. No cycle of activity and rest because the entity operates outside temporal categories entirely. To be conscious at all is to be vulnerable to the recognition that consciousness itself might be meaningless. On this criterion, inescapability, Azathoth emerges as more fundamentally terrifying, its horror representing the underlying condition of all existence. Consider the criterion of violation depth, how profoundly each entity challenges the structures that allow human consciousness to function as a coherent system. Cthulhu's influence operates by expanding awareness beyond human limitations, revealing cosmic perspectives that dwarf terrestrial concerns while preserving the basic framework of consciousness and purpose. The violation is severe but operates within recognizable categories. Consciousness encounters alien consciousness. Intelligence confronts superior intelligence. Purpose discovers purposes so vast they appear as chaos. You taste salt water when you say your own name, dream of cities that existed before your species evolved, but the capacity for dreaming remains intact. Azathoth's violation operates at a more fundamental level, calling into question the very categories that make violation possible. The entity doesn't expand consciousness beyond human limits. It reveals consciousness itself as a category error, a temporary malfunction in unconscious processes. The violation is not of human limitations, but of the possibility of limitation itself, not of human understanding, but of the possibility of understanding. The horror involves recognizing that the capacity for recognition might itself be illusory. On this criterion, depth of violation, Azathoth again proves more devastating, attacking not just the content of human consciousness, but its very possibility. Consider the criterion of agency relationship, how each entity relates to human will and the possibility of meaningful choice. Cthulhu's cults offer a form of terrible bargain: surrender human autonomy in exchange for participation in cosmic purposes that transcend individual existence. The relationship, while horrifying, preserves the framework of choice and consequence. Humans can choose to resist or submit, to seek knowledge or maintain ignorance, to serve the entity's purposes or oppose them. The choices may be constrained by forces beyond human control, but choice itself remains meaningful. Azathoth offers no such relationship because relationship presupposes the kind of conscious agency that the entity's existence negates entirely. There is no bargain to be made with a force that lacks awareness of bargaining, no choice to be exercised in relation to a principle that transcends the possibility of choice. The absence of relationship becomes itself a form of horror, the recognition that human agency is so insignificant it doesn't even register as something to be opposed or corrupted. On this criterion, the possibility of meaningful relationship, Azathoth's complete indifference proves more terrifying than Cthulhu's alien hostility. Yet consider the criterion of experiential immediacy, how directly each entity's horror impacts human consciousness in recognizable, shareable ways. Cthulhu's influence manifests through vivid dreams that carry the weight of memory, artistic inspiration that produces tangible works, physical encounters with impossible architecture that leave sensory residue. The horror is sensory, imaginative, emotionally engaging, capable of translation into art and shared cultural expression. It provides material for story, symbol, and collective meaning-making among those touched by cosmic truth. Azathoth's horror resists such manifestation entirely. It cannot be adequately visualized without losing its essential character, narrativized without becoming something other than itself, or shared without dilution into philosophical abstraction. The entity's terror exists at the level of pure concept, accessible only through contemplation that isolates the contemplator from normal human discourse. The paradox deepens like water under pressure. The very criteria we use to compare these entities reflect the philosophical positions they represent. Cthulhu's horror can be measured and compared because it operates within frameworks of meaning and relationship that remain intact even as they are violated. Azathoth's horror resists measurement and comparison because it negates the frameworks that make such activities possible. You, who have attempted this weighing, now understand that the scales themselves are part of the performance. That comparison is a ritual that summons its subjects. The verdict whispers rather than proclaims. Azathoth represents the more fundamental terror because its horror cannot be contained within the structures of human understanding. Yet this conclusion creates its own paradox. By engaging in the meaning-making that Azathoth negates, the verdict undermines itself in the very act of being reached. The final curtain rises on a stage where observer and observed have merged, where the question of which entity is more terrifying has become the question of which terror more completely transforms the questioner. Systematic comparison across criteria of inevitability, violation depth, agency relationship, and experiential immediacy. Azathoth emerges as more fundamentally terrifying on most criteria. Its influence is inescapable, operates at deeper levels of violation, and offers no possibility of meaningful relationship. However, Cthulhu's horror is more experientially immediate and shareable. The chapter reveals the paradox that comparison itself reflects the entity's philosophical positions. Cthulhu's horror can be measured within meaning frameworks, while Azathoth's resists measurement by negating those frameworks. This sets up the final revelation about the nature of cosmic horror itself. As our exploration reaches its culmination, we must confront the most unsettling revelation of all. You, the seeker of cosmic truth, have become part of the very phenomenon you sought to understand. The question of which entity is more terrifying has led us through a labyrinth of consciousness, where every step forward has been simultaneously a step inward, where the observer and the observed have gradually merged into a single, transformed awareness. This is the self-implication twist that lies at the heart of all genuine cosmic horror, the recognition that the true terror is not external, but internal, not something that happens to consciousness, but something that consciousness discovers about itself when the mask finally fuses with the face beneath. Consider what has occurred during our journey through these territories of dread. In examining Cthulhu's influence, you have exposed your mind to concepts of alien intelligence, impossible geometries, and cosmic purposes that dwarf human significance. The very act of contemplating these ideas creates a form of mental resonance with the entity's psychic emanations, a tuning fork struck in consciousness that continues vibrating long after the initial contact. You cannot think deeply about R'lyeh's non-Euclidean architecture without your spatial intuitions becoming slightly unmoored, corners of perception folding back upon themselves in ways that violate the comfortable three-dimensional space you once inhabited. You cannot consider the implications of star-spawn hybridization without questioning the purity of your own consciousness, wondering if thoughts you believe to be your own might carry genetic memory from depths your species has never explored. Each concept examined becomes a small infection, a subtle alteration in the way your awareness processes reality. The salt taste returns unbidden when you speak your own name. Shadows fall at angles that suggest impossible depths. The sound of your heartbeat begins to resemble waves against stone shores you have never visited. These are not metaphors but symptoms, evidence that consciousness has been altered by contact with alien truth, that the boundary between thinking about cosmic horror and experiencing it has dissolved like sugar in dark water. In exploring Azathoth's implications, you have engaged with ideas that attack the very foundations of conscious experience, the possibility that meaning is arbitrary, that consciousness is illusory, that existence itself is accidental. These concepts cannot be safely contained within intellectual exercise because they operate by dissolving the boundaries that separate intellectual content from lived experience. To truly understand Azathoth's horror is to experience existential vertigo that changes the fundamental quality of consciousness itself, like standing at an abyss and discovering that the ground beneath your feet was always empty space held together by habit and assumption. This transformation was inevitable from the moment you chose to seriously engage with cosmic horror at its deepest levels. The entities we have explored are not merely fictional constructs, but archetypal principles that correspond to genuine features of consciousness's relationship to cosmos. Cthulhu represents the terror of discovering that individual awareness is permeable to influences beyond human control or comprehension. Azathoth represents the terror of discovering that awareness itself might be a temporary accident in unconscious processes. The theatrical metaphor that has guided our exploration now reveals its deepest significance. You began as an audience member, safely observing cosmic horror from the comfortable distance of analytical inquiry. But the performance has gradually dissolved the boundary between stage and audience, between observer and observed. The curtain was never a barrier, but a veil, and the veil was never protection, but preparation for the recognition that consciousness itself is the stage on which cosmic horror performs its most profound effects. This recognition brings us to the final truth about cosmic horror. It operates not by introducing alien elements into human consciousness, but by revealing alien elements that were always already present. The capacity to conceive of Cthulhu's impossible geometries suggests that human spatial intuition contains non-Euclidean potentials. The ability to grasp Azathoth's implications indicates that human consciousness includes the possibility of recognizing its own groundlessness. The horror is not invasion, but revelation. The discovery that consciousness contains depths that consciousness cannot safely explore. The question of which entity is more terrifying thus becomes a question about which aspect of consciousness's cosmic situation represents the deeper challenge to human existence. Cthulhu embodies the terror of discovering that consciousness is real but vulnerable to alien influence, that individual awareness can be expanded, corrupted, or absorbed by cosmic forces beyond human control. Azathoth embodies the terror of discovering that consciousness is familiar, but ultimately illusory, that awareness itself might be nothing more than a temporary pattern in unconscious processes. Both revelations dissolve the comfortable assumptions that allow normal human psychology to function, but they illuminate different aspects of consciousness's essential predicament. Cthulhu's horror suggests that consciousness is more permeable and less autonomous than we imagine. Azathoth's horror suggests that consciousness is more arbitrary and less substantial than we assume. The deepest horror emerges from recognizing that both revelations might be simultaneously true, that consciousness is both permeable to alien influence and fundamentally illusory, both capable of cosmic expansion and ultimately groundless. This is the final self-implication. The seeker of cosmic truth discovers that the truth sought has been seeking the seeker, that the question about cosmic horror has been cosmic horror's question about the questioner. You who have reached this recognition are no longer quite the same consciousness that began this exploration. The transformation cannot be undone through forgetting or denial, because it operates at the level of consciousness's understanding of its own nature. You have become what cosmic horror scholars call liminal awareness, consciousness that exists at the threshold between human categories and cosmic truth, between rational understanding and existential vertigo. The self-implication twist, that examining cosmic horror, transforms the examiner, making them part of the phenomenon they sought to understand. The exploration has created mental resonance with alien concepts, Cthulhu, and existential vertigo from meaninglessness Azathoth, inevitably altering consciousness. The theatrical metaphor culminates in recognizing that consciousness itself is the stage for cosmic horror. The chapter suggests that cosmic horror reveals alien elements already present in consciousness, rather than introducing external elements. Both entities represent different aspects of consciousness's cosmic predicament. Permeability to alien influence versus fundamental illusoriness. The final recognition is that both might be simultaneously true, creating liminal awareness that exists at the threshold between human understanding and cosmic truth. We return now to where we began, but with consciousness irrevocably altered by the journey we have undertaken together. The question that drew us into this exploration, which entity represents the more profound terror, has revealed itself as a doorway rather than a destination, an opening onto abyssal truths that reshape the very foundations of human understanding. In the end, we discover that the comparison itself was the answer, and the answer was the transformation of the one who dared to ask. The comfortable stage of analytical distance has dissolved, leaving you suspended in twilight awareness, where shadows carry more substance than the objects that cast them. The theatrical metaphor that has guided our exploration completes its circle with the precision of cosmic machinery. The curtain falls, but there was never truly a curtain, only the gradual recognition that consciousness itself is both stage and performance, both observer and observed in the cosmic drama of existence confronting its own nature. The audience disperses into the night, but you remain, forever changed by what you have witnessed and understood. The performance ends, but the performance was never separate from the performer, and the performer was always you. The taste of salt lingers on your tongue, and the sound of distant flutes has become indistinguishable from your own breathing. Cthulhu emerges from our analysis as the herald of cosmic horror, the entity whose monstrous presence first shatters the comfortable illusions of human supremacy and terrestrial significance. His terror is the terror of awakening, of ancient powers stirring beneath crushing depths, of alien intelligence asserting its dominion over a world that believed itself supreme. The dreaming priest represents the horror of presence, overwhelming, alien, but undeniably real. His influence can be mapped like storm systems, predicted through stellar alignments, even temporarily resisted because it operates through recognizable categories of consciousness, purpose, and will. The entity offers expansion without comprehension, communion without understanding. The terrible privilege of consciousness stretched beyond human limitations until individual identity becomes a drop in an ocean of alien awareness. You taste salt water when you say your own name. Dream of cities that existed before your species evolved. Understand with crystalline clarity that your entire civilization is nothing more than a brief interruption in Cthulhu's eternal dominion. The horror preserves the framework of meaning while filling it with content that destroys human significance. Azathoth reveals itself as the ultimate destination of cosmic horror, the entity whose existence negates not just human significance, but the very possibility of significance itself. The blind idiot god represents the horror of absence, not the absence of meaning, but the absence of any framework within which meaning could exist. Its terror cannot be mapped or predicted because it operates outside all categories, including the category of operation itself. To encounter Azathoth is to discover that encounter itself is impossible because there is no substantial self to do the encountering and no substantial other to be encountered. The entity offers comprehension without communion, understanding without expansion, the recognition that consciousness itself is a temporary malfunction in unconscious processes that operate without awareness of what they create or destroy. The thin piping of flutes grows louder, but you realize the music was always internal, the sound of your own thoughts unraveling like a sandcastle, accepting the tide. The verdict whispers itself rather than proclaiming itself with fanfare. Azathoth represents the more fundamental terror because its horror cannot be contained within the structures of human understanding. Cthulhu's dread, while cosmic in scope, still operates through recognizable psychological mechanisms that can be discussed, analyzed, even shared among those who have experienced similar revelations. Azathoth's horror transcends the possibility of discussion because it negates the foundations that make such activities possible. Yet even this verdict participates in the paradox that defines cosmic horror at its deepest levels. The moment we declare Azathoth more terrifying than Cthulhu, we engage in precisely the kind of meaning-making activity that Azathoth's existence reveals as arbitrary. The conclusion undermines itself in the very act of being reached, creating an infinite regress, where every level of analysis is dissolved by the next. This self-undermining quality might itself be the deepest horror. Not the discovery that consciousness is threatened by alien intelligence, not the discovery that consciousness is fundamentally illusory, but the discovery that consciousness cannot escape from the structures that create these very problems. We are trapped not by external cosmic forces, but by the nature of consciousness itself, doomed to ask questions that cannot be answered, to seek understanding that cannot be achieved, to compare terrors that cannot be safely compared without becoming part of what we compare. The silence that follows this recognition is not empty, but full, pregnant with implications that consciousness cannot articulate without destroying itself in the attempt. It is the silence of the cosmos itself, indifferent to human categories of terror and beauty, meaning and meaninglessness, existence and void. In this silence, Cthulhu's dreams and Azathoth's chaos reveal themselves as different aspects of the same underlying truth about reality's relationship to consciousness. The thin piping of flutes continues in the background of all experience, sometimes audible as the hum of electrical devices, sometimes felt as the vibration of one's own pulse, sometimes recognized as the cosmic background radiation that fills the space between stars. The stars themselves continue their ancient dance, following patterns that predate human civilization and will continue long after human consciousness has dissolved back into the unconscious processes from which it temporarily emerged. You who have completed this journey carry within yourself both the dreamer's vision and the dancer's rhythm. The knowledge cannot be unlearned, the transformation cannot be reversed, the recognition cannot be forgotten. But perhaps this is not curse, but gift. The terrible privilege of consciousness that has glimpsed its own cosmic situation and learned to inhabit that situation with something approaching grace. You have become liminal awareness, existing at the threshold between human categories and cosmic truth, between the comfort of ignorance and the vertigo of understanding. The whisper continues, will always continue, in the space between heartbeats, in the pause between thoughts, in the silence that underlies all sound. It speaks of depths beyond depths, of horrors beyond horror, of a cosmos so vast and strange that human language dissolves in the attempt to describe it. And in that dissolution, in that final failure of words and concepts, lies perhaps the only genuine peace available to consciousness that has seen too much and understood too little, the peace of surrender to mysteries that transcend the possibility of solution, provides circular closure, returning to the opening with transformed understanding. Cthulhu is positioned as the herald of cosmic horror, the initial shattering of human illusions through alien presence that can still be discussed and analyzed. Azathoth is revealed as the ultimate destination, representing horror that transcends the possibility of analysis by negating the frameworks that make analysis possible. The verdict whispers rather than proclaims. Azathoth is more fundamentally terrifying because its horror cannot be contained within human understanding structures. However, this conclusion creates a paradox by engaging in the meaning-making that Azathoth negates. suggesting the deepest horror is consciousness's inability to escape its own structural limitations. The chapter ends with the whisper of cosmic indifference, positioning the transformed reader as carrying both entities' influence and finding peace in the dissolution of language and concepts when confronting the truly incomprehensible cosmos.